Whatever the occasion, effortless elegance is right this way. Because Hilton brings you new ways to stay courtesy of the Nomad London. And it doesn't stop at award-winning dining in a space draped in velvet and illuminated by vintage chandeliers. No, this day goes beyond with unparalleled personalized service and attentive hospitality. Oh, and did we mention the Nomad London can be booked using your Hilton Honors points at Hilton.com? Hilton, for the stay.
The Elder Wand, the Resurrection Stone, the Cloak of Invisibility. Together they make the Deathly Hallows. Together they make one Master of Death. The last will and testament of Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore.
Do not pity the dead, Harry. Pity the living, and above all those who live without love.
Hey everyone, welcome to Hogwarts, a podcast. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Hogwarts, a podcast. We are covering Chapter 35, King's Cross. And there's no person I wanted to have on this chapter more, mainly because she wouldn't let me have anyone else on it. Elizabeth is with us.
It's my favorite chapter of the series. I had to be on it. I put in a permanent request from book one.
So you'll get Elizabeth's thoughts on her favorite chapter. It's an interesting chapter for sure. But before we get to the chapter itself, you might have noticed we've covered a couple of pretty sizable and important chapters recently.
Nothing happened. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So we have put aside some of our shout-outs just to get to all of the material that is in those really loaded chapters. Well, we will get to several of those comments.
The backlog of them.
Yeah, we have quite a few. Again, thank you all for continuing to comment on our social media. We got comments from a couple of different sources. Mm-hmm. So we really appreciate all of that interaction. But let's start off with a comment from Jenny on Twitter. Jenny says, as much as it would be risky to talk to Bill, they should have. Bill would be able to give them information about goblins, at least without actually telling him what they were up to, but how to deal with and work with them properly. Obviously, that's in reference to Shell Cottage when the trio makes the decision to form an alliance with Griphook to get into the Lestrange vault. And we debated, hey, Bill's an expert on goblins.
Maybe talk to him.
Maybe you should talk to him about how goblins work.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jenny, for that comment. I agree. They should have probably talked to Bill at least vaguely about the circumstance.
It would have been smart.
Anyway, we have the next comment is from our own Molly.
Hi, Molly.
Molly leaves a comment on Deathly Hallows, Chapter 24, The Wand Maker. And Molly says, I want to know more about these wand conventions and all the wand maker gossip. And then she adds, there's so many avenues we could take this, Stan. Molly and I can definitely spin a couple of long tangents on a future episode with the idea of wand drama. Anyway, our next comment is from Stephanie, who left a comment on Deathly Hallows, Chapter 28, The Missing Mirror. Stephanie says, I think you both have elements of being correct. I think Albus would have told Aberforth what the mirror does, and to keep an eye on Harry because Harry has a job to do. Albus wouldn't have said anything about the Horcruxes, but you're forgetting that Harry has had the mirror in the pouch on his chest this whole time. I think Aberforth was eavesdropping on the trio's conversations, and that is how he learned about the Horcruxes.
That's a really good point. He has been on his chest the entire time. Granted, maybe muffled a little bit by the robes, but we know, it's there. It has a magical ability to it, so why shouldn't it have a magical eavesdropping aspect to it?
My only question about that, though, is how is the mirror activated? Mm-hmm. And if Aberforth is able to activate the mirror on his end by saying Harry Potter or whatever have you, then yeah, he could very easily listen in to what the trio is doing. Mm-hmm. I don't know that it's as free and open as, let's say, Phineas Nigellus and the Portrait.
Right.
So the Portrait is...
That has a life to it.
Completely open.
Yeah.
Whereas the mirror at least requires some level of activation.
I mean, Sirius said when him and James used it in detentions, they would kind of like whisper each other's name to each other, and then they could talk in that detention through the mirror. So I don't know if he'd have to say Harry's name and that automatically connects to Harry's mirror or what. But I do like the idea of it being overheard.
It would certainly give Aberforth a lot of insight as to what's going on. Yeah, so it's an interesting thought if he was able to overhear via the mirror in the pouch.
Yeah.
So, interesting thought, Stephanie. Thanks for sharing. Next comment is Abigail from Deathly Hallows, Chapter 19, The Doe. Abigail says, Ron has had many hardships. He got attacked by a... Oh, this is a great list. Sorry, I'm reading ahead. Ron has had many hardships. He got attacked by a big stone statue when he was 11. That's the chess game in Sorcerer's Stone. His sister was taken into the Chamber of Secrets. His friend was petrified. He was dragged off and had his leg injured by a giant dog. His pet is a murderer.
I love that.
It's aggressive.
It's accurate.
But it's accurate. I'm not done yet. He had to attend the Yule Ball wearing a lacy dress.
Equally traumatizing.
He was attacked by brains in the Department of Mysteries. His father almost died. He was poisoned. And he was severely splinched.
I'll add to that. He got in a massive fight with his best friend during the 4th year. He's watched a whole bunch of traumatizing things happen to Harry in fear for his life the entire time. Like, there's been a lot. That's a good list.
Well, and seeing his family dynamic suffer, too, with the argument between
him, Percy
and Arthur.
Yeah.
And how that has kind of altered the family dynamic in a way. I mean, that's a lot of familial stress.
I definitely agree with Abigail.
He has been through quite a lot.
Yeah, remember when he was attacked by the spiders, his worst fear in his life? That was also a thing.
That is also true. Yeah, his meeting
so many things on the list.
with Aragog and Aragog's wonderful children.
Nightmares
that is a traumatizing
for
thing, for sure. And then he's just gone to school at Hogwarts where things happen every day. But anyway, I digress. We have a comment from Drea on Deathly Hallows, Chapter 31, The Battle of Hogwarts. Drea says, I think the gargoyles couldn't be fixed because they were damaged beyond magical repair. We've seen some damage that can't be fixed, like Harry and Ron's wands, and how they have to completely destroy Horcruxes. Some things can't be fixed by repair, which is true.
That's a good point.
It's very true. Mm-hmm. You see a couple of things specifically that are damaged by dark magic or by curses that can't easily be fixed. Dumbledore's hand,
right?
For one example, comes to mind. So, I mean, there's a couple of things that is absolutely true.
We've seen before, there's some spells that have a permanence to them. Like, you think about the permanent sticking charm, like that is always going to be there. Or I always liked, it was a very, very tiny detail, but it was about a book that somebody read that made you speak in limericks for the rest of your life. Ron was warning Harry about it when touching the Riddle's diary. I'm like, that's a permanent thing that you can't undo. So it's, if it's been broken beyond repair, then someone better enchant some new gargoyles. Give them a personality.
Drea does have another comment. However, we will save that one for part 2 of this episode.
All right.
Okay. We have a comment from AV, who left their comment on Deathly Hallows, Chapter 32, The Elder Wand. AV says, an order definitely counts as Voldy killing. He made Horcruxes after causing Myrtle to be killed and Hepzibah to be poisoned. So that is good enough to make a Horcrux. So can getting the wand the same way? Either way, thanks for the deep dive on my favorite chapters. I have listened to these last chapters many times. Give us a thumbs up.
Aw, thanks, AV.
Really appreciate that, AV. Thank you for listening to the chapters so many times. I know especially the Elder Wand and the Battle of Hogwarts are lengthy chapters and episodes, and there's a lot happening in them.
We talked for a very long time.
We did. And there was a lot to discuss. As far as AV's point, yes, it's true about the Horcruxes, that he was able, because he was the cause of the death.
Yeah, like the Basilisk is the thing that killed Myrtle, but he was able to, I guess, control it with Parseltongue, so therefore be in charge of her death.
Right. The critique I had here, I guess, was it's slightly different magic because it's the Elder Wand. Mm-hmm. My only thing really about it was if this was his whole obsession, which it is at this point, a complete obsession.
Right.
Like, this is what he poured his whole relative year
into searching. Yeah, because he thinks it's the only way to get rid of Harry.
So my only thing is, if you're that obsessed about it and you think it is your only option for winning, I just would eliminate all of the
you're going to do it right.
question marks.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like AV is wrong here either. I totally see that line of thinking as well, is that he ordered the snake to attack and kill Snape. Therefore, I suppose that technically still counts. Especially, furthermore to AV's point, if I'm putting words in AV here, Voldy's soul is still in Nagini, so it's technically like Voldy's still
That's true.
killing.
And I guess there's still the connection with Parseltongue. Like, he had to order it in Parseltongue to go kill Snape's.
AV has a second comment, but we will again save that for the end of part 2. So stay tuned for these 2 comments. We do have comments from Isla. Isla left a comment on Deathly Hallows, Chapter 15, The Goblin's Revenge. And the comment is, I audibly reacted when you read my comment all the way back in Sorcerer's Stone. I finally caught up to the episode you read it on.
That's so cool.
That's a really cool comment. Thank you for listening.
Yes. Thanks for sticking with us.
Thank you for seemingly binge listening. We really, really appreciate all of those listens, and we appreciate the comments. And you do have more comments.
If that was chapter 15, that wasn't that long ago. So they must have been like super listeners.
Yep.
We appreciate that.
And Isla left more comments, which we'll get to on future chapters.
Ooh, okay.
But we will get to them. So thank you so much for listening. And we're happy to read out all of these comments and interact with you all. We love hearing the opinions, even if they're against ours.
Oh, yeah, it's 100%.
We like hearing the alternative opinions and the reasoning for those opinions. We really enjoy reading that.
Plus, people come up with stuff that we hadn't thought about.
For sure. Mm-hmm. For example, like the pouch thing, like the
mirror
in the pouch. Really good point. So we do love seeing all that. We enjoy seeing the participation in our polls because, that's a way for you to, again, input your 2 cents on the chapter that was had. You can reach out to us by finding us on our social media at HogwartsAPod, whether that's Twitter or Blue Sky or YouTube or Instagram. And obviously you can leave a comment and participate in those polls on Spotify if you're listening on Spotify. So now we have a chapter to get to. And it's a big one, even though it's only like 14 or 15 pages. It's a small chapter in the number of pages, but it is meaningful and it is impactful.
Oh gosh, I had so many tissues next to me to cry my eyes out this first read through.
Really?
This chapter and the previous one, I was just like an emotional wreck. Like, it hurt.
This, I think, the first time I read this chapter, I was quite honestly confused. When I read this for the first time, it's dense.
It's so dense.
I mean, there is a lot of info being dropped on you, and some of it is not exactly the cleanest, but that's not a knock on the writing. It's just there's a lot of exposition and backstory and
filling up the loophole.
Yeah. And you're like doubling back on things to just fill in all of those little details. It's dense. And the first time I ever read it, I was like, I don't know if this makes sense, but I'm just going to go with it. And then it did take probably a couple of read-throughs before I'm like, okay, I'm getting the whole picture now. I still have questions, which we'll get to.
I just like how, while it's so dense, the juxtaposition of here's this really, really heavy emotional stuff, and yet it's just a single conversation in a very undeveloped, I guess you could say, misty white kind of room. And it's just like the simplicity of it, like against the denseness of the conversation, is just so great. I love it.
So this entire chapter is essentially just a conversation between Harry Potter and Albus Dumbledore,
which is always my favorite chapters.
However, we begin with just Harry, and I let off this section on my outline as what it is to die. Mm-hmm. And I think it's an interesting portrayal of that, because obviously we leave off from the last chapter where Voldy hits him with a killing curse.
Right.
And then it's just
black.
Yeah. And Harry, quote unquote, wakes up in this space, and he becomes aware of his existence, and he assesses the situation. He can feel. He has eyes. He's naked. Mm-hmm. And which are all tangible things. So he's literally taking an assessment of himself. It's like, okay, all right, I can feel something. So I therefore must exist, and this must be a space I exist in.
I feel, therefore I am.
Kinda.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just a very slow, logical way of just checking off a list. He does recognize that his surroundings are kind of a cloudy vapor that hasn't really yet formed into anything yet.
I love that, because the line itself said how it's like, it's not that the surroundings are hidden by the cloudy vapor, it's just that it hasn't formed into anything yet. So it's literally like you on a blank page with very little detail.
He begins to hear a pitiful noise nearby. And for the first time, he becomes really aware of himself, and he wishes for clothes, which then immediately appear nearby. So then he logically, I think, wonders, am I in some great room of requirement?
I mean, I like the idea of this place being a room of requirement. I think that's a really cool concept. But I also just love the room of requirement, so maybe that's part of it.
So he finds the source of the odd noise, which is a small, naked, childlike entity with skin that was raw and rough and abandoned under a seat of some sort. Mm-hmm. And Harry recognizes that he is afraid of this thing.
He was kind of reprimanding himself because he's like, I should comfort this thing. It looks like it's the size of a baby. I think it's a child, and yet this thing is so repulsive that even going near it makes me want to, like, I don't know, like run away. Like, I should not go towards this thing that is just so completely warped and gross. It's as unpure as Harry seems to be pure, or at least surrounded by pureness.
What thoughts do you have of Harry becoming, I guess, conscious of his existence and awareness of his surroundings in this place after what has just taken place?
It's really cool. Because I don't know, the previous chapter, his whole, march towards his death, and maybe march is the wrong word, but forcing himself to go further and further and further into the forest and just face it. It took so much life out of him to literally meet his death, and so much bravery and just the willingness to let go. And to go through all that pain and the emotions behind it. I mean, like I said, I was a wreck the first time I read that chapter.
Was it this part that made you somewhat emotional?
Oh, this part made me emotional too. But it's like the lead up, like the 2 chapters together, facing your death and realizing like this is my end and I have to do it. Not that I necessarily want to, but I know I need to for the greater good and to save people. But at the same time, like I'm measuring my heartbeats, and every footstep that I take is one step closer to the end of my timeline. Like that was so heavy for little Elizabeth to read the first time. But then, yeah, having the opposite of here's this clean, pure, misty looking place with like a nice large domed glass roof with the sun shining through, and it's just quiet, and it's Harry alone and coming back to terms with his existence and just being like, this is new. I really, really liked that. And it just, I don't know. It just gave me such a sense of peace after everything he just went through.
I think he's remarkably calm in this situation.
And the place calms you.
I guess. He does reference the fact that the light and it's surprisingly warm, and that is calming. Mm-hmm. But you know what you just went through.
Yeah.
Like, how do you just wake up and become conscious of your being, knowing what you just lived through, and be like, yeah, okay.
I think it's just the magic of the place. I just went through it. I survived the thing that I was fearing so much and having to force myself to go do. And now that I've done it, it's like, okay, well, now what? Like, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like whenever there's something I don't want to do that I'm really, really, really anxious about, it's the lead up to the moment that has me anxious. And then when I actually do the thing, it really doesn't freak me out as much. But the afterwards is like, whew, big sigh of relief, and then I can finally relax again. I feel like here's Harry's chance to relax because it's like all the bad is gone. The only bad in this place seems to be this naked child, and it doesn't seem like it can be helped much.
So it's almost like I'm getting the image of a reverse birth, kind of, because you're entering this new place naked.
Yeah, it's heavenly.
Kinda.
Yeah.
But also, to your point about the last couple of chapters being a super emotional ride for little Elizabeth when she first read this.
I mean, to be fair, I cry at like literally anything. I'm very, very emotional with that kind of stuff. But this wrecked me.
Yeah. Well, so my first read of these last several chapters were not the same experience.
You didn't cry?
So I obviously was wrapped up in the battle scenes, as I still am now, many years later. But I think the last chapter where he spends the entirety of the chapter thinking about the miracle of life and walking to your death and what that truly means hits me way more as an adult.
Yeah.
Because I think when I read it as a kid, you do have this false sense of invulnerability or invincibility where you're like, death is a long way away for me.
Right.
So I can't necessarily relate.
Right.
Even though, by the way, Harry is 17 here, which is far from what one would think of as death is upon us. So even though I guess I was probably about the same age, but I just couldn't really put myself in his shoes here. I couldn't relate as well. But now that I'm older and death has creeped into my life as I've lost family members and I know people who have died. I had a friend who's my age who died. Death becomes a much more tangible, real thing all of a sudden.
Right.
So now on rereads, that scene hits way harder.
Well, I remember, like, my first time reading it in 2007. Like you said, we were graduating from high school, and it was the summer. And at the time, the emotion, the hard emotional reaction was because Harry is going towards his death, and it's the death of a beloved character that we've seen this entire series. And, like, me personally, I was facing the uncertainty of going to college and meeting new people and being away from home, like, legitimately for the first time in my life. So that, while it wasn't like death, it did feel like here's this big life change that's happening, and how do I face it? 5 years later, when I was rereading this series, it did hit me extra hard because my grandfather died, and I distinctly remember reading this chapter, and it was just like, I can't get through it. It was way too emotional for me to get through it because it was just, it hit me so hard. But as hard as it was to read, like, about approaching death the way my grandfather was, there was also this sense of hope that this chapter gave me, which I think is why I like it so much, because it's just like, you know, death. I know I've always been a morbid person, and people tease me about that, but it's like the beauty that comes with death and seeing this after death scene, like, it gives me hope in ways that, like, other things don't.
That maybe death is not the end of the road.
Yeah. It's very well written.
Well, Harry is assessing this blemish, if you will, to this pure scene. He's assessing it. He's afraid of it. He's repulsed by it, as you said. Mm-hmm. And then he hears some familiar words, a familiar voice. He hears, "You cannot help." And that is where we will take a break. I've already spoiled it. It's Albus. But we will get to the conversation that ensues in part 2.
Yay.
So we will take a little break, and we will be back with this extensive conversation between Albus and Harry. And remember, we have 2 comments to also address as well at the end of part 2. So stick around. We have a lot to discuss still, and we will be right back after this break. Before we get to our break sound, I'd like to acknowledge our friend Andy, who helps us produce our intros and our break sounds. If you want to hear more of Andy's work and like Formula One racing, check out the Outlap F1 podcast. It's your one-stop shop for Formula One news, insights, race previews, and reviews. You can find them wherever you listen to podcasts, and they even have a YouTube page. So check out Andy, Cody, John, James, and Deanna, and join them on the Outlap.
So, you just started using LinkedIn Premium. Now what? Well, on your premium company page, you noticed around 7.5 times more page engagement and 5 times more page views. Well done. And now, new clients are messaging you. All because you're using LinkedIn Premium, which helps you get the business growth you want. Think big, small business. Think big. Start your free trial at linkedin.com/premium small business. That's linkedin.com/premium small business.
Dobby has no master. Dobby is a free elf.
All right, so we are back with part 2 of chapter 35, King's Cross. And we get into the meeting of Albus and Harry. And Albus starts with, "Harry, you wonderful boy. You brave, brave man."
Let's not skate over the fact he's also wearing midnight blue robes.
Yes. Which is a stark contrast to how the rest of this place looks.
Everything else is bright and white. So here he comes. He's a vision to see.
So the two begin to talk. They pulled off the walk and talk. Harry begins with a very Harry comment of, "But you're dead." And Albus is like,
"Yep.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, definitely."
Yep.
And Harry is like, "Then I'm dead too?" And Albus is like, "Well, that's the question, isn't it?"
It's so Dumbledore.
And then he ponders, and then he's like, "I think not." Mm-hmm. And Harry continues, but I should have died. I didn't defend myself. And Albus replies, I think that made all the difference.
He also discovered during that conversation that his scar is gone, which I find interesting. Like, it's like his whole body has just, like you said, like rebirth. It's like his skin is...
It's brand new.
It's brand new again, yeah.
He also notes that happiness seems to be just radiating from Albus. So Harry asks the question that we all want to ask. And he doesn't even... I love this. He doesn't actually even ask a question. He just says, explain.
It's what he's wanted this entire series.
It's what we've all wanted.
Yep.
Because at this point, we've all been kept in the dark, and now you just had a chapter where Snape unveils a whole lot of stuff.
Yep.
And Harry's like, not questioningly, he's almost demanding, you need to explain.
Yeah.
Explain what's going on.
Well, I mean, especially after the memory of, hey, Harry has to die. Like, that idea of, oh, Dumbledore didn't actually want me alive. Dumbledore wanted me to die. Well, gee, thanks. I see how he had me sever my own lifeline. Of course you want to get some answers now.
So Albus responds with, he destroyed it. Your soul is whole and completely your own. Harry gets distracted and he says, what is that? Referencing the child under the seat. And Albus replies, something beyond either of our help. Harry says, but if Voldy used the killing curse, and no one died for me this time, how can I be alive? And Albus says, remember what Voldy did in his ignorance, in his greed, in his cruelty. And Harry thinks for a little bit, and he says, he took my blood. Albus, happily, says, precisely.
Which, if you remember back in Goblet of Fire, when Harry told Dumbledore that Voldemort took some of his blood, he said for a second he thought Dumbledore had a triumphant look on his face, and then it flashed to, okay, well, that's an issue we'll have to worry about later. But now we're seeing, like, oh no, this has worked out in your favor, the fact that he has kept your blood.
Albus says, he took your blood and rebuilt his body with it, which includes Lily's protection, now inside both of you. He has essentially tethered you to life as long as he also lives. Mm-hmm. And Harry's like, wait. Hold on.
That is the opposite.
What you told me was the other way around. You need to explain more. Albus explains, or tries to explain, you were the seventh Horcrux, the one he never intended to make. So this rendered his soul so unstable that it broke apart completely. Voldy, his knowledge of house elves, children's tales, love, loyalty, innocence, still remains woefully incomplete. He took your blood believing it would strengthen him, when in reality it kept Lily's sacrifice alive and boldened it. Mm-hmm. Harry asks, you knew all of this? And Albus goes, I guessed. But my guesses are usually right.
Just a little dusting of the shoulder there.
So what do we think about this initial interaction between the two?
I love him asking for an explanation, and I love that it's a guess, but of course with Dumbledore, his guesses, like you said, they're usually pretty solid. I remember having to read this a few times to truly understand it the first time, because I didn't get like, wait, okay, he's a seventh Horcrux, so technically his soul was split in 8 different ways with the one in his own body, or wait, there was only the 6, and it was a little confusing. But I do like the idea of the full circle of, Voldemort put himself into Harry put bits of his blood into himself and redoubled Lily's protection. And the whole aspect, Dumbledore said that love, loyalty, innocence, all that stuff. He was like, Voldemort has absolutely no knowledge about that, or how they all have power beyond the reach of magic. And it's fun to see as a villain how even though Voldemort has in many ways attempted to overcome his mistakes the first time around, it's still this fundamental flaw of his being that he doesn't know love that keeps him from succeeding in this moment.
It's like a magical blind spot.
It really is. Which I remember reading a theory once. I don't know if this was a confirmed one or not, but it was basically saying how Voldemort isn't capable of love because he was the offspring of a love potion. So there was not actually love in his formation between his mother and Tom Riddle. So because of that disability, I guess you would call it, that's why he has such darkness and psychopathic behaviors and lacks the empathy to feel the love that is Harry's such great power, which I thought was an interesting way of looking at it.
My confused portion of this was Harry's confusion as well. He tethered you to life while he lives. And Harry's like, wait, time out. You said literally the exact opposite a couple of years ago.
Right.
Which one is it?
Right.
I don't think, at least in this little portion here, Albus does a really good job of explaining that away. He explains about the seventh Horcrux, which is correct, and everything he says about Voldy is also correct. But he doesn't really explain the why is one this and why is it now the exact opposite. He doesn't really explain that well here.
I think the reasoning is because, as we'll see towards the end of the chapter, Harry has to make a choice. And I kind of feel like if Dumbledore gave him full insight as to what it means to both be tethered to each other, then it would be influencing Harry's choice. So
what you're saying is Albus is seeing a potential issue, and he's giving a bunch of word salad to just
I wouldn't call it word
get
salad.
Harry off of.
No, I wouldn't call it word salad. I just think...
Because he doesn't directly answer the question.
I think in part prophecies, there are so many factors to go into this, which is why he said divination is such an imprecise branch of magic. So the fact that it was both of you needed to die, well, possibly that might have just happened. I mean, it seems like this maimed baby thing is Voldemort's piece of his soul. So the fact that both of you are here and now you are connected in life because of his mistake of taking Lily's blood, there's no easy explanation, so you just gotta go with it.
I don't love Albus's answer to Harry's question. However, after what seems like a long silence, Harry asks a second question. And this question, one, I love this question, because I think all of us, when we read the portion or the scene where this takes place, we all had the same question of like, what just happened? And why? And unlike the previous answer, I think Albus does a pretty good job of explaining it. So, what's the question? Harry asks, why did my wand break the wand he borrowed? Going all the way back to the Seven Potters scene, when the wand acts of its own accord and blasts Voldy with this seemingly extraordinarily powerful magic.
Right.
That Harry's like, that's not me. Like, I did not do that.
And he said that multiple times. Everyone was like, no, that's just your power. He's like, no.
No, I have no idea what that was. Albus responds with, I cannot be sure. And Harry comes back with a very Harry response of, well, then have a guess. As Dumbledore just got done saying, my guesses are pretty good. Well,
I like
have a guess at this one.
I love him laughing, though. He's like, yeah, you're right.
All right, fair wordplay. All right, haha. I enjoy the sass. So Albus goes into his quote-unquote guess of how this works when I think this is
probably the answer.
Probably just the answer. And Albus says, you and Voldy have ventured into unknown and untested magic. He doubled the bond between you two by taking your blood. Your courage won. Your wand overpowered his. Your wand imbibed with some of the power and qualities of Voldy's wand, regurgitating some of his own magic back at him. More powerful, than whatever Lucius's wand had ever produced. Harry's courage plus Voldy's skill equals death for Lucius's wand. He does note, though, because Harry's like, oh, does that mean my wand was really super powerful?
Well,
why could Hermione break my wand so easily?
Yeah.
And Albus responds with, only towards Voldy is that wand particularly powerful. It's interesting, though, because Harry recognizes he's not capable of that kind of magic.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting thing to be aware of. Voldy sees this magic and is like, how is this kid, who I've heard stories about, capable of this?
Which sets him looking for the Elder Wand.
Which sets him down the path of looking for the Elder Wand. It's just such an interesting scene. For me, it's a satisfactory explanation that Lucius's wand was just overmatched, seemingly by
Voldemort. Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
So, Harry asks, where are we? And he looks around for a second and notices it is King's Cross Station. And I like Albus during this. He's like, I don't know, this is kind of your show here.
Yeah.
I don't know.
This is your party.
Yeah.
King's Cross? Oh, you say so? Yeah.
Cool. Okay, that's great. Harry then hits on a more touchy note. He asks about the Deathly Hallows. He doesn't even ask. This topic's hanging over everything.
Yeah, we gotta talk about it.
Where he doesn't even need to ask a question. He just states something.
Yeah.
And this is just him saying, the Deathly Hallows. Albus looks less than old man. He looks like a small child caught in wrongdoing.
And he asks Harry for forgiveness.
Albus asks specifically to forgive him for not trusting Harry. And he says, I have known for some time that you are the better man.
Yeah, he was afraid of Harry falling into the same mistakes that he had done in his youth.
He says this with tears in his eyes.
Yeah.
And Harry's like, what are you talking about? And Albus responds with, the Hallows. Real and dangerous. They are a lure for fools. Master of Death, was I ultimately better than Voldy? Harry says, of course you were. You never killed if you could avoid it.
Yeah, Hallows, not Horcruxes.
And Albus responds, true. Hallows, not Horcruxes. So what do we think?
I mean, I totally get the guilt that he has there. This has clearly been something that he's never talked to anybody about. It is like a child. It's been something that has weighed on his mind since he was a young adult.
So let's talk about this quote really quick. Was I ultimately better than Voldy? And Harry's opinion of it is, well, you didn't kill if you could avoid it, so that automatically makes you better than Voldy. I think it's a loaded question, and I just wonder if Albus is asking that question in this context. Because, yeah, you can make that easy argument that, oh yeah, you're better than Voldy because, cool, clearly, right? And he's not asking that question in other contexts because you can make a real argument that Albus is not exactly a very good person.
Yeah, but I guess literally you could also say, hey, look at Voldemort's soul that's on the ground. That thing is revolting. Look at you right now. You are a full-blown version of yourself. Clearly, if your soul was not as mangled as that is, you did
something right.
Something right.
For sure.
I think he just wants the reassurance. Like, this has been weighing on his mind for years. And here's the first person he can have the actual conversation with and have them understand where he was coming from. And he sees Harry as an equal. He sees him as better than him.
To your point about therapy, I think this is a very therapeutic conversation for Albus. I don't know that it's one he could have had in life.
That's an interesting comment because I feel like every other Dumbledore-Harry conversation has been therapeutic for Harry. This is the first time it's therapeutic for Dumbledore.
I think he recognizes that Harry can fully... Now that everything is on the table,
yeah,
he can fully understand Dumbledore's flaws as well as his achievements.
It humanizes him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's like, look, everything's on the table now.
Yeah.
And here's how I feel about it. And you get that because you've seen it all. But anyway, Harry asks the question, so it's true. All of it. The Peverils. And Albus says, I think the Peverils were just really gifted, dangerous wizards who succeeded in creating powerful objects, with the cloak, particularly, traveling down Ignotus's line all the way to Harry. And Harry says, wait, me? And Albus goes into a story about James, and how James showed him the cloak a few days prior to his death. I could not believe what I was seeing. I asked to examine it. It was immensely old and perfect in every aspect. James then dies, and I find myself having 2 Hallows, all to me. And then he continues with, you cannot despise me more than I despise myself.
Well, first of all, the idea of did they actually meet death or were they very, very powerful wizards? What's your take?
We have, on the podcast, made a pretty strong argument for death existing. I suppose if this was the real world and I was Harry, I guess I would lean more towards the practical.
I mean, you've seen the existence of magic, so that makes sense that you would.
Yeah, but so if I lean more towards the practical, and Albus's way of thinking of like, in reality, they were probably just extraordinarily gifted wizards. Mm-hmm. Can we just take a second? If that is true, if we're taking that to be fact, that the Peverils were just extraordinarily talented wizards. So if we're setting up like the most powerful witches and wizards in the wizarding world that we know of, and we're just setting them into tiers, how could you not put the Peverils like on that top tier?
No, they'd have to be. This is incredible magic if that's the case.
It would dwarf, I think, in my opinion, anything that the founders of Hogwarts did. And they've done some crazy, insane magic. So if you're creating an invisibility cloak that's this good and this powerful, an unbeatable wand, and a resurrection stone that can bring back the... Are you kidding me? This is crazy.
See, that's why I lean more towards the existence of death. To be fair, once again, that is because I'm a very morbid person and I have literal statues of the Grim Reaper on my desk at school. I'm creepy. It's okay. Here you have the manifestation of death. And maybe it's because they're wizards that they're able to see them, similar to the way wizards are the only ones that could see Dementors or experience the aspects of magic that muggles are kind of blind to. But I think this magic is so incredible that it makes sense for there to be a personified version of death, especially given the 3 powers when combined create death as a whole. I just love how it's like every aspect, the wand being so powerful, the resurrection aspect of it, the invisibility of death. It's really cool to see the power split into 3 different objects.
Well, let us know what you guys think. Is the entity of death in this story real? Did it actually impart gifts upon these 3 brothers as they fooled death, or they got past death? Or are they just 3 extraordinarily, extremely gifted wizards? Let us know, and we will love to see those answers, those thoughts.
He did say the whole aspect of Grindelwald coming to Godric's Hollow was the draw of Ignotus's grave. So, yes, we have solid proof that these 3 brothers were those 3 brothers. So Harry says in response to Albus and his bit about you cannot despise me more than I despise myself. Harry says, I don't despise you. And Albus then responds with, well, you should. You should despise me. Again, it's that guilt that he's been bottling up for decades. Decades and decades.
He says, you know about my sister. I was gifted, brilliant, but I wanted to escape. I wanted to shine. I wanted glory. And he says, "Do not misunderstand. I loved my parents. I loved my brother. I loved my sister. But I was selfish."
He felt
And
trapped.
then he came.
Yeah.
Grindelwald.
Well, it's like Aberforth had said, like, oh, Albus thought he was trapped, thought he was better than this, thought he could be off doing great, amazing things, which he could have been. So it makes sense that Dumbledore would feel frustrated with being stuck at home, playing carekeeper, you know?
Well, we have to dive into Albus as a whole after this whole context of this conversation, because there's a lot to dive into there.
Yeah.
But Albus speaks of Grindelwald, and Albus says that Grindelwald's ideas inflamed me. Muggles forced into subservience. Wizards triumphant. But I reconciled it because it was all for the greater good. The greater good. And we get into the Hallows, an unbeatable wand as a weapon to lead us to power. The Resurrection Stone. To him, to Grindelwald, that meant an army of inferi. To Albus, it meant the return of his parents and the relief of having to be responsible for his family.
Mm-hmm. Specifically Ariana.
The cloak. Honestly, never discussed that very much. But in Albus's eyes, he might be able to then hide Ariana.
I find it interesting that they didn't discuss the cloak much. I get that Grindelwald probably felt too confident and powerful, similar to Voldemort, and is like, I don't need to hide. Why should I?
All three of them. Dumbledore, Grindelwald,
too.
And Voldy. They all felt that they were competent enough that the cloak was irrelevant.
Which also shows the arrogance of his youth back then, because he was young. Now as an old grown man, he's like, the magic of the cloak is that you can use it with multiple people the way Harry has. So however they had wanted to use the cloak, it probably wouldn't work the same way. It wouldn't be as effective as it has been for Harry.
Well, the other magic behind the cloak is it has been passed down generation to generation. So even if Albus did want to use the cloak, he said it would not have worked for me as it has worked for you because I'm not the rightful owner to it.
Similar with wands, there's a mastery of the magical artifact, and you have to gain its
allegiance.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Albus continues that 2 months of insanity, cruel dreams, and neglect. Those are harsh words.
Also a very short amount of time. 2 months is not long.
No. But reality returned via Aberforth shouting at him. The fight obviously occurs, which we know about. And as he even brings up the idea of the fight, Albus begins to cry in earnest. He continues that years have passed and Grindelwald grew in power. Albus was offered the Ministry of Magic several times, but had learned that I was not to be trusted with power. So what do we think about just the Grindelwald of it all, just through there with the explanation of how they were going to use the Hallows?
It definitely, like Hermione said when they first read Rita Skeeter's book, it shows their age, or I should say their youth at that point. It makes sense for Dumbledore to ignore the darker sides of Grindelwald's comments because he wants the best for his friend, but he's also thinking selfishly about what would be best for him.
I don't know that he ignored it all. I don't think. I know he knew exactly what Grindelwald was going for and agreed.
No, he knew what Grindelwald meant with, like, the army of inferi and the whole, like, what he wants to do with the wand. But he said he eased his conscience by thinking, like, well, this will be for the greater good for wizards, and it will also benefit me.
That's an excuse.
So I guess I'll go with it.
That's an excuse.
It's an excuse.
Let's not shove to the side. Grindelwald's ideas inflamed me. What were those ideas? Muggles forced into subservience.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's different context. For Grindelwald, it's he wants the power over them. He doesn't want muggles to keep wizards in hiding. For Dumbledore, he has the history of how muggles in hiding affected Ariana, and how Ariana being in the state as she is has affected his own life. So I think he argues for himself, like, it inflames me because if wizards did not have to live in hiding, then life would be better for all of us. But most of all, it would be better for me. And teenagers at that age are very self-centered. That's literally what their brain development is at.
Yes. However, these are not normal teenagers.
No.
These are teenagers that are honestly, intellectually, and honestly in maturity, way above not only their peers, they're way above most adults at this. I just don't want to gloss over the fact that Albus was very aware of what the end result of this was going to be. And it's human beings forced into a less than existence,
but again,
to push up other individuals.
I don't disagree with you. I just think there's also another reason, which we can talk about later, that factors in here that we have to consider. We can come back to this.
We leave with, obviously, Albus being offered the Ministry of Magic several times. And he had learned, like I said, that he was not to be trusted with power. Harry comes back to Dumbledore with, but you'd have been way better than Fudge or Rufus. Albus responds with, would I? I'm not so sure, because power is my weakness and my temptation. Perhaps those best suited to power are those who have never sought it, but have it thrust upon them. I was safer at Hogwarts. I think I was a good teacher. So here's my thing, and I'm just going to make this really quick. I've been on the Rufus bandwagon for a while now. But here's why. It's because of the three of these individuals, of Fudge, of Rufus, and of Albus. Albus, for reasons he's just stated, can't be trusted with power because it does have a pull to him. It does have a corruption of his morals, of what he knows is right, but he just can't help himself. Fudge is the stereotypical politician, right? He wants the power. He wants the notoriety. He wants to be well-liked in that sense, right? Rufus, however, is different because he didn't politically seek that. And I know everybody maybe in a government office does have some ambition to him, and that's fine. But he was the head of magical law enforcement. In a time of war, he was promoted to that Minister of Magic position. It was thrust upon him. What has he done with that? Or what did he do with it?
Tried to blackmail Harry into doing things he didn't want to do?
He led the Ministry of Magic, held the fort, and it did not fall until he did. And when he fell, that's when all of it broke loose. And he did so without giving up Harry.
We've debated this
Rufus
before.
is and was, of these three individuals, the best Minister of Magic.
I'll agree about Fudge being too much of a politician. I think that while Rufus was thrust into the position of being in charge, he had already had a decent amount of power in his role already. And for him, it wasn't so much like I'm taking up the mantle and I'm going to save the day. It was he was a military man and it's a war. So instead of leading as a politician, it's I'm leading as a general.
So how's that not taking up the mantle?
I don't think it makes him the best minister because it's all his focus on is the war. And I get that, like, yeah, that's obviously going to take the most focus, but if you were to take him out of a war setting, would he be able to handle the politics and actually care for people? I don't necessarily think so. I mean, the way he tried to get Harry to do the propaganda, Dumbledore, in reflecting that he would not be the best in this role, that alone puts him above Rufus and Fudge. But I agree with him.
He never had the role.
But I agree with him that he should not be in the role if he is literally doing the self-reflection and thinking, no, my power is better spent at a lower level.
You can't say that he'd be a better Minister of Magic when he himself is saying, I would not be.
I think his showing reflection that power would corrupt him automatically makes him better than the other two because they did not see how power would corrupt them.
Who says Rufus was corrupted?
I don't think he was great with being a minister.
I personally love this question and response by Harry and Albus because Harry asks what clearly I am on an island of this thought. Not many people agree with me at all. But it's the thought with Harry. Oh, you would have been way better than Fudge and Scrimgeour. And Albus is like, I don't think so. Actually, I don't do well with this. I get tempted greatly by power. I think it's a great response from Albus. And yes, I'm using it to legitimize Rufus. But Albus says, I think I was a good teacher. And Harry says, you were the best. Which I don't know exactly how he can really say that either, because he never actually had him as a teacher, except for, I guess, the memory thing.
I mean, he was the principal, essentially, of the school, and once upon a time was a teacher.
Yeah, I suppose. But Albus says, I buried myself with teaching, while Grindelwald raised an army. He feared me. Perhaps he did. But less than I feared him. Mm-hmm. Not what he could do to me magically. We were pretty evenly matched. But I think he knew what frightened me most. And he obviously talks about the fear of who actually dealt the blow to Ariana that ended her life. And Harry has this introspection of, at last, I know what Albus would see in the mirror of Erised.
Which we have talked about before. We debated what he saw in it because it was said that in the movie, I think the Fantastic Beasts series, that he would look into the mirror and he would see Grindelwald. Now Harry's like, oh, I get why he understood my fascination. It's because he wanted to see his family whole again. And being able to get their forgiveness for what he views as probably his greatest sin. It's rough. It's sad. Harry gets it.
It's an interesting back and forth between Harry and Albus, through this entire conversation. But that was a particularly interesting one.
And again, it humanizes him because he's like, yeah, like I put off battling him. I shouldn't have done that. But I was scared. I didn't want to learn the truth. And the truth can be very, very scary in this case.
How many times do you think he has delved into his own pensieve and tried to recreate that scene? Or maybe not. Maybe he specifically avoided it because he didn't want to know that answer.
One or the other.
I bet he might have specifically avoided going into that memory because he didn't want to know that answer.
He might have been like Snape and just like bottle it up and put it away.
Maybe. Harry says Grindelwald tried to stop Voldy getting the wand. And Albus is like, yeah, they say he showed remorse in his later years. I hope that that's true.
Dumbledore said how, well, maybe it was just his attempt to stop Voldemort from getting the Hollow. And Harry was like, maybe it was his attempt to stop Voldemort from breaking into your tomb. And that made Dumbledore tear up a little bit more, too.
Yeah. I wonder why Albus seemingly never went back and spoke with Grindelwald. And I think, as we talked about very few people, I think, can have an open, true, and honest conversation with Albus Dumbledore. I think you have Grindelwald, who's on his same level intellectually, and as just a profound, magically gifted wizard. Mm-hmm. You have Aberforth, who knows every nook and cranny of Albus Dumbledore. He knows all the good, all the bad, and all the in-between. And Harry, who's clued into maybe almost as much as the other two are. Mm-hmm. And here, Albus is getting it post-death with Harry, but I wonder why he didn't ever go back, as far as we know, go back and talk to Grindelwald about...
Well, other than the learning the truth about whose curse actually killed Ariana?
Maybe. But I mean, if you're an old man that's been tortured by this...
Well, I think that's why he looks like a youth when the topic of conversation is brought up again. It's something that he's been stewing upon his whole life, and learning the truth is still too painful, so he doesn't want to do it.
Well, even not just that, if it wasn't just that, if there's so much that him and Grindelwald could have discussed.
Yeah.
Then Harry says, "You tried to use the resurrection stone." And Albus responds with, "I lost my head. I imagined that I was about to see Ariana and my parents and tell them how sorry I was."
Yeah, he said it was the hollow he most craved in his adult life, which is interesting because that is similar to Harry. Harry said he wanted the resurrection stone out of all three of them, which freaked out Ron and Hermione, but Dumbledore obviously understands the appeal of it.
He calls himself a fool for it.
Right. The fool part is the fact that this is a cursed Horcrux. This is not the resurrection stone that you've been searching for. This has been corrupted.
Well, he's a fool for multiple reasons. He's a fool for obviously not remembering at the time that this is a cursed Horcrux. That's fool number one. Fool number two is he knows the history of the Hallows. He knows the tale behind them. Mm-hmm. He also knows that he would not be using this Hallow in the correct usage of it, which would be fool number two.
Yeah, but once again, the idea of seeing your family members and being able to get that forgiveness, that is such an appealing thing for him that's been haunting him for decades.
Would he even be able to do that appropriately is the question. He continues on with, maybe a man in a million is fit to unite the Hallows. Mm-hmm. I was only meant to have the meanest of them and not boast of it, not to kill with it, but to save others from it.
I like the quote he continued on with. He said, the cloak I took out of vain curiosity, and so it could have never worked for me as it works for you, its true owner. The stone I would have used in an attempt to drag back those who are at peace rather than to enable my self-sacrifice, as you did. You are the worthy possessor of the Hallows. So you alone are able to master death, because in all aspects you didn't seek the Elder Wand to use it to make yourself the most powerful person in the world. You didn't seek the stone to drag back the army. You went to the dead feeling like you were already part of the dead. That is why you could die and be the master of death.
Harry looks at Albus and smiles. And he thinks, how could he remain angry with Albus now?
They did ask him, though, like, why'd you make it so difficult?
Well, how could he remain angry with Albus? I think there's still a fair amount he could be very upset with Albus over.
I don't know. I think seeing the remorse that he clearly shows, crying so much.
I think this is part 2 of the same conversation they had at the end of Order of the Phoenix, where he says then, and he says now, you don't even know how upset with me you should be. Like,
well, he also said, like, don't you assume that you're the only one who has ever suffered loss. I have also suffered loss.
Sure.
I get grief.
Yeah.
I've been forcing it upon myself for decades.
But he's told Harry twice now, like, you think you're upset with me? Oh, I'm not upset with you. Well, you should be. You should be very upset with me.
Then it also goes back to, he said how, Harry's greatest strength is his ability to love. And part of love is forgiveness. That's what he's doing.
So, Harry then asks, okay, well, why did you make this all very difficult? And Albus says, I counted on Granger to slow you down. I was afraid that your hot head might dominate your good heart. You might seize the Hallows at the wrong time for the wrong reasons, which I think is also appropriate. And that's the struggle that he had at Shell Cottage as he's burying Dobby of like, what do I go for here?
I've always seen him like the second he learns of something, he always wants to rush towards it.
Well, especially
anyway.
That pull to the wand. He'd lost his wand. Obviously, there was a strong connection, possibly an invincible one there.
Dumbledore had a good quote then. He said, you are the true master of death because the true master does not seek to run away from death. He accepts that he must die and understands that there are far, far worse things in the living world than dying. Which I really, really like that quote.
Harry actually asks a question here and says, Voldy never knew about the Hallows? Albus says, no, because he didn't recognize the resurrection stone when he made it a Horcrux. He doesn't need the stone or the cloak. The Elder Wand was the only one he ever desired. And then continues on with, poor Severus. Harry asks, I have to go back, don't I? And Albus responds, that's up to you. If you wanted to, I think you could board a train to take you on. And he continues, I think if you choose to return, there is a chance he may be finished for good. I can't promise that, but you have less to fear from returning than he does. We get the quote.
Do not pity the dead, Harry. Pity the living, and above all, those who live without love. It is my favorite literary quote of all time.
Oh, that's a big statement.
It really is. I mean, there's a lot of good literary
coming from an English teacher. You're an English teacher.
It hits me so well because it's like, you know, the morbidness of it, certainly, but at the same time, the romantic aspect of it with love, and not even necessarily romantic love, just the idea that it's like, as long as you have family and friends, people who care about you, you are not alone. You are still part of the living. So if you are ever feeling alone, there's still light that surrounds you. So don't be sad for the dead. Like, live your life, enjoy it to the fullest. It hits hard. It's very well written.
Well, he does continue by saying precisely that. By returning, you may ensure that fewer are maimed, fewer families are torn apart. So you can, by going back, you can ensure that others are able to live with love in their lives and not live without it. And
he calls it a worthy goal.
It's a worthy goal. Harry follows up with, tell me just one last thing. Is all of this real? Or has it all been happening in my head? And Albus says, of course it's happening in your head, Harry. But why on earth should that mean that it is not real? That's another great quote.
I love it. That quote has caused a lot of debate. The question of, was this actually happening? Or do you think this was literally in his head? Was it some kind of like coma state? There was a whole theory that I saw that maybe the only reason why he was able to answer his own questions as Dumbledore kind of just smiled at him was the fact that he was in a coma and he had already known those answers. It just popped up that way. I think I side more for that it's actually happening. And while it might be in his head, I still feel like it's, you know, his soul going up into this limbo state, meeting Dumbledore. It's not like his physical body is up there, although he does have the sensation of touch. I just like the idea of reconnecting with the dead. So I don't want it to be just in his head as a coma.
There's a lot to that. I know there are some emotions and some feelings that are tied to, like, the heart or whatever. In reality, a lot of that stuff is your brain firing. And you're feeling things because your brain is recognizing that this is a good thing or a bad thing or whatever. So things like fear and love and hate and all of these wondrous things that you're experiencing do happen in your head. So I like the quote, because why on earth should that mean that it's not real?
Right.
Obviously, Dumbledore has some great quotes. I like Harry in this chapter, don't get me wrong. I like Harry in this chapter because as a fan or as a reader, he asks all of the appropriate questions that we all want to be answered. Obviously, Albus does a lot of the heavy lifting in this chapter of just coming out with response after response after response, and they are all heavy. And it's all dense, as we said earlier, of just, he's unloading a lot. Both just straight up information, and he's unloading a lot of his own weight that he carries with him throughout his life, and apparently now in his death. So, I mean, there is a lot in this chapter. So much so that we might actually do an unprecedented part 3.
Oh, what?
Yes. We're going to have a part 3 to this episode, and we are going to take another short break. But when we come back, we have, I think, some thoughts on Albus as a whole that we can kind of glean from this chapter. We definitely have some Dumbledore and Grindelwald to discuss. And
your 2 other comments.
We have 2 more comments to get to that spark a little bit of debate. So I think I'm interested to get into these 2 comments, and I'm interested to get Elizabeth's opinion on them. So we will be right back for part 3 of this episode.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistant's assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Dobby has no master. Dobby is a free elf.
All right, so we are back with part 3 now of chapter 35, King's Cross.
It's unprecedented. I'm so happy to be here for it.
We have a couple of big things that we need to discuss. So I kind of wanted to give us all a break.
Yeah.
And then get into what we have left, which is our thoughts on Albus in totality. And then a couple of big comments that are in regards to Snape. So let's start off. Obviously, this chapter was a lot of Albus. So let's start off with, now that we really have Albus Dumbledore's full, entire character arc.
Right.
What do we think of Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore?
I love how it humanizes him. Because I feel like, similar to many large, famous characters throughout history in real life, we glorify them so much and we kind of get rid of the messy parts of their lives and instead just put them on this pedestal, and we forget that they were human. So for Dumbledore to finally have a chance to speak about his own life and reflect on his own regrets, it definitely shows us, like, he was imperfect. He wasn't this, like, white shining knight of glowing perfection. He was a person. He struggled in his youth and had large regrets about it. And I thought it was really fun seeing Harry play the adult role for the first time with Dumbledore. Because I've always loved the conversations of Harry and Dumbledore. But seeing Harry get to be the adult to comfort him and be like, yeah, you know what? You were imperfect, and that's okay. I thought that was really fun.
No, I think that's a really good point that you make, is I think a lot of people in the fandom have either put Dumbledore on this god-like tier. Mm-hmm. And this chapter, like you said, shows that he's human. He makes mistakes. And as he has said before, if I make a mistake, it's usually a profound mistake. It's a big mistake. And he has made several big mistakes.
And I know we've argued before, like, you know, Dumbledore has flat out manipulated Harry in a way that is not healthy.
And others.
Not right. And others, too. I personally, when I've read this chapter, if anything, I kind of fall on the line of Harry of being like, okay, I'm not going to be mad at Dumbledore anymore. Because everything that Dumbledore did, every choice that he made was difficult emotionally and intellectually. He had to
World-changing decisions.
World-changing decisions you want to put some weight behind. So everything he did was to get Harry to this point and try to make sure that the protection that Lily gave Harry is also going to be present by Harry choosing to go to his death without defending himself. Like, he is casting a perfection spell on everybody at Hogwarts. So if he had had the information prior to this moment, I don't know if Harry would have had the strength to do what he did. I don't know if he would have been as ready for death the way he was now. So while I don't love Dumbledore manipulating him, I do think, and I hate to say it, but for the greater good, to quote Grindelwald and Dumbledore, I do think it was the right decision.
Albus always told Harry about the qualities or traits that make him different from Voldy, right? And I think that's true for Albus as well. There are some certain characteristics and traits in Dumbledore that make him inherently different from Voldy.
Harry.
And Harry, that's true. Let's not pretend that Albus wasn't one bad day or one bad decision from becoming very similar to Voldy in a lot of different ways. So Albus is a complicated character, and he's morally gray on more than one topic.
Right. I mean, that was the whole Horcruxes versus Hallows discussion.
I would like to think we can all agree that ultimately Albus lands on the side of good. I think that's fair to say. I think we can all agree generally there. However, he's skirted that line a couple of times. And if a couple of decisions or a couple of actions or a couple of situations go a different way, he might not have ended up on the good side of the ledger. He might have become, if not Voldy, very similar. And part of that is because of who he befriended.
God, imagine a what if episode where Dumbledore was the bad guy and Voldemort was the good guy.
I would love a whole what if Elseworld, whatever you want to call it, multiverse.
Harry Potter series.
Where Albus and Grindelwald don't part ways there. And they continue on their path.
Yes.
It would be a really interesting story to tell.
I bet I could see it as being like, eventually the two battle each other anyway, but just because one wants the power over the other.
It could either go two ways. Albus could have that conscience check where he's like, hey, this is maybe too much. I was with you to a point. And then they split like later, like maybe in their late 20s, 30s, whatever. Or as they grow and develop as a pair, some of the doubts that he might have had start to fade away. And he realizes, hey, maybe this is the right way.
Well, I'm going to steal your job of transitioning because this perfectly segues into what I was saying earlier about the decision of Dumbledore when it was dealing with Grindelwald. I had suggested that maybe there were other factors at play, which what I was thinking of was J.K. Rowling's announcement way back in 2007. Can you remember? She said how Dumbledore and Grindelwald were gay. And I remember at the time, like, when I first heard that, I was a little shocked. Not because I was like, oh my gosh, that's so weird. But I was just like, oh, I didn't even really think about that. But then looking back at it, I could see definitely hints of it. When she revealed that, it puts it into different contexts that, well, maybe Dumbledore didn't shut down Grindelwald so quickly in those 2 months of them discussing their world takeover was because he was not seeing the red flags of his friend/lover and was just like, rose-colored glasses, I bet I can change him. And it's like, oh, no, not really.
So what you're alluding to was expanded upon in the Fantastic Beasts movies.
Yes.
Small spoilers for the Fantastic Beasts movies. Obviously, I think at one point in the movies, they show Albus looking into the mirror of Erised.
Oh, right.
And he sees Grindelwald.
Right.
So they obviously hint very strongly at the potential romantic connection between the two.
Right.
Also, and I find this interesting, and I want to get your take on it. Mm-hmm. In the Fantastic Beasts movies, because obviously this is the most we get of Grindelwald and who he may have been in the wizarding world, Grindelwald has a very talented way of speech. He has a way with words. They can be very persuasive in an almost magical way. Not just like, I am persuading you with good logic and rhetoric. No. The implication was...
He has charm to him.
His charm and his persuasion in his speech almost had a magical flavor to it.
Yeah.
And you can be swayed to his side.
Which is true with, like, a lot of those cult leader politicians who rise in the ranks and get a following. They have some kind of charm to them that is just so appealing that you almost forget the things that they're saying are really, really horrific. Maybe don't follow them. And let's face it, like, we both work around teenagers. When they fall in love...
They get a little blinded.
Fall in love, and they're going to be with each other 24/7, and they're going to get married someday, and everything's going to be great until it's not, and then it's devastating.
Well, let me transition now, because you talk of teenagers who were swayed by maybe a crush or a love. And our two comments that we have to get to talk about an individual who may or may not have been swayed by his crush during his school years.
Are you talking about Snape?
No, I'm talking about Seamus Finnegan. What is wrong with you? Why would you go there? No. Yes, we are talking about Severus Snape.
Oh, Seamus, that romantic.
That's what I'm saying. So... the first comment that we will get to is from Drea, who left the comment, stunningly enough, on chapter 33, The Prince's Tale. And Drea says, Snape joined the equivalent of the Nazi Party. And he was Voldy's #1 guy. Not sorry that is a bad person. It's not like he suddenly realized he was wrong and worked against them. He didn't switch sides because he disagreed with Voldy's war against Muggles and non-purebloods. He only changed to save his childhood crush. Maybe he got there eventually, but we don't really see a change of heart. Even when he, quotes, changed, he basically mentally and emotionally abused children. So thank you for the comment, Drea. We are going to...
break all that down.
You gave us a lot to discuss there, and
much appreciated. Thank you.
Much appreciated. Thank you for your thoughts. It's a loaded comment, and it's a loaded character in Snape, and I think there's a lot to break down there. First, to the point of the #1 guy thing, he wasn't really Voldy's #1 guy until really late in this game.
It was more like book
6.
Yeah.
Because Lucius was really the #1 person in the Death Eaters. He was that #1 Death Eater up until his fumble at the Department of Mysteries, and then his downfall began.
And then even then, like, his house was still being the headquarters. He was still with Voldemort until that very end bit to go get Snape.
So this is well into Snape working with Albus.
Yeah.
And after Lucius's fall, that Snape really becomes the #1 Death Eater. And then I think he did suddenly switch sides. I think actions took place, and he realized, hey, that was not the outcome that I had desired. And he comes to Dumbledore. And yes, Drea, it is true that his feelings for Lily were the leading cause of said flip. But my question to you, Drea, is, does that really matter? That his feelings for Lily caused his change of heart? If he began a lifetime of working against Voldy because of his feelings for Lily, okay. Does it really matter what that reason is if he switched and became a person for good going forward?
I think it both does and doesn't matter. I think It does matter that he flipped for the good of love, because if he had flipped for some more superficial reason, like, oh, I'm getting this big payment from the government because I'm essentially blackmailing them, or I'm going to get blanket pardons for everything I do, no matter how horrendous it was, or you're going to give me large plots of lands where I can build a mega mansion and rest out my days forever. Like, I think those types of motivation would be a little bit more corrupt than love. So if he was just flipping to basically be like, I'm going to get the best deal out of the situation because I can see that the tables are turning, then I wouldn't necessarily trust that Snape is full-heartedly into what he continues doing, like the actions he now takes. But I think flipping for love, I know that seems super cliche, but if you're truly in love and you're going to do good because of it, then he's going to go full in on doing good.
I think the loss of someone you truly care about can instill change in you.
Yeah.
And now we can debate all day long whether he should be that emotionally invested in Lily.
Oh, yeah.
And that's fair. Mm-hmm. That's a discussion to have. But I don't think his feelings for Lily should downplay that he risked his life.
I mean, even if
it
wasn't a romantic love for her, but the love of a friendship, the love of somebody who kept him company during the summers and gave him an escape from his abusive family and, you know, listened to him and helped him have a friend at Hogwarts where he felt like a weirdo, that's still love that one would want to try to defend. And if it was taken from you, you would absolutely feel deeply enough to switch your sides.
That's an interesting point you make, where I think everybody assumes Snape's feelings for Lily are strictly romantic based, and they might be. And that's fine.
It heavily implies.
It heavily implies that he would hope for something more there. And that's fine.
Right.
But I think you brought up a good point with Lily was an outlet for him that he never had in any other relationship his entire life.
Right.
So that emotional connection to someone can be extraordinarily strong.
Honestly, you know what it reminds me of? Luna's connection to Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Neville. Like the fact that, and Ginny, the fact that she painted them up on her ceiling, even though it's not like they hung out that much in Hogwarts, but she was such an outcast weirdo that people openly mocked to her face.
And bullied her.
The fact that these were the first people who showed her kindness meant she went full in on that friendship.
It could be a powerful, powerful thing.
Yeah.
Well said. Thank you for bringing up Luna as an example.
I love Luna.
Luna's fantastic. The other thing about Drea's comment is even if he changed, he basically mentally and abused children. And while I obviously do not condone...
Please don't abuse children.
Let me say this again. Obviously, I do not condone his treatment of Harry, Neville, or any other students that he may have had during his teaching career. It is interesting to note that we see him with Gryffindors through a Gryffindor's eyes. I'm not saying that Harry was overly biased in his view of Snape, but he was somewhat. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah.
So, you know, was Snape as cutting? Was he as abusive? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. But clearly he did have a particular grudge against the Gryffindors. We don't see him much with Hufflepuffs, and we don't see him much with Ravenclaws. And obviously he's very much pro-Slytherin. But I would like to just, again, for the record, state that let's not pretend all of the teachers have been wonderful at Hogwarts. Even the good ones. Lupin, for example, again, made children face their worst fears in a public setting for a grade. Not great. Barty Crouch Jr. put them under an unforgivable curse.
Yeah.
Hagrid puts them in physical danger on a seemingly class-by-class basis. Speaking of class-by-class basis, Trelawney predicts students' deaths and harm on a frequent basis.
That's not great.
And although McGonagall is generally considered to be a wonderful teacher, as I agree she is, but let's not pretend that she can't be quite snippy at times with her students as well. Mm-hmm. Hogwarts is a hard place to be. It might be fun, and it might, like, literally the magic of the school and everything, but let's not pretend that it's daisies, sunshine, and rainbows every day. I mean, sometimes you're put in some pretty harsh situations by everybody.
Well, as a teacher, I have thoughts. First and foremost, to go back to your bias comment, I 100% have had this happen to me. I've had this honestly happen to me today. I had one student accuse me of favoritism because I marked him off on a project compared to one of his peers. And then I had to hold him after class and be like, dude, you realize the reason why I took points off was not because of favoritism. It was because you didn't follow the directions that you did not read. And let me show those directions to you. 10 minutes ago, you were saying how I was the worst person ever because I favored everybody else over you. Now that I've talked to you, you're like, yeah, you're right. So I'm sorry, like the fact that it's the Gryffindor's perspective 100% adds into the bias that we, the reader, are getting.
And again, that's not saying that Snape wasn't maybe overly harsh.
Right.
Or overly critical or even flat out mean to them.
Right.
That we're not saying that.
No, that 100% also happens. It's just also students have a bias.
Yes.
In terms of the treatment, whenever I think of Snape's treatment, the two ones I think of the most are for Harry and Neville. I want to start with Neville. One of the first ones that really shocked us, I think, as readers was when Snape threatened to poison Trevor, Neville's toad. And in the moment, it seems incredibly harsh because the obvious thing is Neville's potion is not a potion. Neville's potion has become this tar substance that is going to, like, crack his cauldron into. This is not a safe thing for a toad to consume. But I think if Hermione had not helped Neville and Snape truly did take the tar substance and shoved it down Trevor's throat, it would have been an extremely traumatic but extremely vivid wake-up call to Neville that you have to pay attention in potions class. If you mess up this potion, it's the difference between life and death. I mean, you might have a resource around, but if you don't, I'm sorry, you're in trouble. So if you want to keep your toad alive, instead of making silly mistakes and not reading the directions and rushing too quickly, you gotta start, like, stepping it up a notch. So I don't condone that behavior because I think you can teach that lesson in a seriously less traumatic way. But I would be interested to see what Snape would do if it started to go south like that. In terms of his treatment of Harry, and with Harry, Hermione, and Ron, I honestly got the vibe this time that treating Harry the way he did and treating Ron and Hermione the way he did was really him just seeing the trio of James, Sirius, and Lupin. I think it's obvious that Harry is supposed to resemble James because he so resembles James. But I think that Hermione represents Lupin in that I'm a bit of a know-it-all way, and I don't necessarily tone down my two friends and stop them from being stupid. And then Ron does have the Wizarding World established pureblood family status that Sirius would. And with it, there's a little bit of cockiness that I think Snape, because of his past bullying trauma, is attuned to in an extreme degree. So even if, like, you know, if Ron makes a snarky comment or if Harry has his sass, any other teacher, it might just, fly off their shoulder, whatever. Haha, that was so funny. 10 points to Gryffindor. But with Snape, because of the past bullying he experienced, it is the extreme reaction, which once again shows he needs some therapy.
Yeah, he definitely has many more sassy responses to some of Ron's or Harry's misgivings in class.
And I'm fine with giving sass to students.
I am too, actually.
Sometimes they respond really well to it, and it makes it a more fun experience. But you also have to know the tone that you give the sass in.
Yes.
And you have to have the relationship established with that student. And
Very true.
I don't think he ever establishes that kind of sassy relationship with the three. It's I'm going to bully you because when I see you, I just see my childhood bullies, and I cannot get past that.
Yeah, no, for sure. We have another comment to get to.
Okay.
Thank you, Drea, for that comment. Again, obviously, we liked talking about it.
Yeah.
So our other comment comes from AV.
Woo.
Also on Chapter 33, The Prince's Tale. AV says, I agree. Snape is ultimately an amazing character and fascinating in how he pulled off the ultimate double agent. But he was a terrible person and very complex and did have some good layers to him. No excuse ultimately for being a total jerk. JK does do a great job of making great characters, which includes Snape. Think about Umbridge. A great character that you can't help but totally despise and hate. Thanks for the psychoanalysis on the characters. Smiley face. Thank you, AV. That's what we're really doing here a lot with Snape as well.
I mean, he's fun to psychoanalyze.
He's fantastic.
Such a gray area character.
We're going to respond to you, AV, here in a second. But I think the great thing about Snape is that me and you and AV and Drea can have this conversation where I don't honestly think any of us are super wrong.
No, every opinion is valid and accurate.
I really believe that.
Yeah.
And your views on it, I totally get, and I see where they're coming from. And I'm hoping you guys, when we respond to this, are also seeing kind of where we're coming from. And it's just a discussion about a really great character.
Well, it just shows the mark of the writing of him. I mean, if you can't love him or hate him, or sometimes you feel one or the other, I mean, that's hard to do.
Yeah. So, Elizabeth, let's tackle the question. Is Snape a terrible or bad person? In my opinion, I'm not so sure. And part of that is he doesn't really strike me as a quote-unquote true believer in Voldy.
Yeah.
And that might shock some people listening to this. Like, how could you possibly say that? Well, the reason is we even have evidence of him saying that Muggle-borns aren't all that different from purebloods in a magical sense. Like, they're capable of doing the same level of magic.
Right.
Which he said to Lily in a memory. And you could argue that he's just trying to maybe butter up Lily or compliment Lily in a way or whatever. And that's fine. And I understand that point of view too. He just doesn't strike me as a true believer. I'll give you a couple of examples of some individuals I do believe are hook, line, and sinker, full Voldy all the time, all day, every day.
Okay.
Does Snape strike you the same as Bellatrix does? Does he strike you the same as Dolohov does, McNair, Bowery Crouch Jr.? To me, no. I think there's a pretty clear line between those individuals and Snape.
Well, I think those individuals would agree with you because he had the distrust from some of the other Death Eaters. I mean, remember in the beginning of book 6 when Bellatrix and Narcissa comes over and Bellatrix is like, I don't trust you, Snape. She flat out said it to his face. Like, if there's Snape is an outsider. That is his definition. He was an outsider in school. He was an outsider in the Muggle world at home with his abusive parents. He's an outsider in this Death Eater cult. Like, he is not in with the crowd because he does not want to be in with the crowd.
Now, I understand a lot of it is, a perception of Snape because he is a Death Eater. He does have a dark mark, so he is part of that inner circle.
And he witnesses
really
a lot or bad things.
But, okay, so he does witness a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that is going back to what Lily had an issue with him in their youth, which is Avery and Mulciber doing some bad things. They did some bad things.
Right.
And he just
You didn't stop it.
They don't say he participated in it. They don't say he added to it. He just witnessed it. He didn't stop it either, which, again, you could argue.
Which reminds me of, like, the Charity Burbage murder. It was, he witnessed it. Should he have done things? Well, sure, but if he had, one, he would have automatically died.
There's consequences,
and two, he was a spy for Dumbledore. He needed to be in the position that he was in. So his hands were tied.
All I'm saying is that, in my opinion, I think there's a clear delineation between Severus Snape, Bellatrix Lestrange, Severus Snape, Antonin Dolohov. I think there are differences there. Let's go non-Death Eater. I think there's a difference between Severus Snape and Fenrir Greyback.
Yes.
Greyback is a sadistic murderer who's out to do as much damage as he possibly can.
While making creepy comments about women.
While making very disturbing comments. Like, Snape is not bad.
Right.
He's just not.
Right.
I think those people that we just mentioned are terrible people. So one might ask, how does Snape become in the same club or in the same presence as a Bellatrix or a Dolohov or any of the others? And I think his background has a lot to do with that. He's a socially awkward, insecure person from a broken home that is ultimately sequestered from his only friend, his only light, if you will. And it's easy to see how he can be lured into this pseudo-family situation when he really has, or what he might perceive as, nowhere else to go. This is his only outlet left to him.
Yeah, because, I mean, when you think about people who seek out cults or seek out gangs, a lot of times there's something fundamentally broken about that person. Maybe it's they need love in their life, because love truly is a very deep human need. Like Dumbledore said with, like, do not pity the dead, pity the living, and above all those who live without love. Here are people who don't have the love, and when you have a cult or a gang being like, look, no one else wants you, no one else accepts you, we'll take you in, we might make you do some stuff you don't want to do, but trust us, we have your back. If you have nowhere else to turn, it's natural that you would turn towards those type of organizations.
For sure. And I think when we're analyzing the character of Snape, it's really important to keep his key characteristics, traits, and motivations from an early age in mind. And, I mean, to that point, should 10 years of his life really determine the totality of his entire life? Because if we're talking about from him entering Hogwarts at the age of 11 to the point when he goes to Dumbledore for a way out, he's 21.
Right, so it's a decade.
So that's 10 years. Well, if we're judging Snape on 10 years, those 10 years where he does fall in league with some future Death Eaters at school, he then joins them when he leaves Hogwarts. Well, if we're judging him on that 10 years...
Which is a very impressionable age.
It's an impressionable age. We need to look at James then. And he was awful during at least the 7 of those 10 years he was at Hogwarts. He made Snape's life miserable.
Yep.
And he went out of his way to do it sometimes.
Yeah.
And if we're judging a person on the worst of them, James unfortunately died at 21. He didn't have the other 14 or however many years Snape ended up having.
Yeah, the percentage of his life where he spends bullying it versus Snape's
is a much larger quantity.
Yeah.
And we understand that clearly something clicked in James where he matured and grew And
Do you think it was love?
For Lily? Yeah, maybe. So, I mean, if we're judging a person on that 10-year span of life, James comes out not so great.
Right.
And, people will probably come back with the whole, again, Snape used a lot of his time. Yes, he fought Voldy. Yes, he was the double agent. Yes, he did a lot of work for the Order of the Phoenix. But he was really mean to some children.
He was.
Which is true. But, I mean, it's not like James and it's not like Albus were perfect either.
And I think, once again, because he never goes through trauma, because he forbids Dumbledore from ever really discussing his love for Lily with anybody else, he is burying deep down inside himself all of the regrets, all the emotions that he had towards Lily, and it makes him a worse person as a result. If he had processed those emotions, if he had had therapy, if any of that had come out, then maybe he wouldn't be so resentful towards students, especially those who resembled his worst bully that he had in high school. It could have been better, certainly, but it's understandable why he turned out the way he did.
Severus Snape, Albus Dumbledore, James Potter, all characters who are viewed in some circles as great characters and in other circles as very negative. I don't think any of these characters are saints, and I don't think many of them are this incarnation of the devil either. I think they've done some good things in their life. They've done some bad things in their life.
And I think they regret it.
That's an important bit. I think all three of them would say they regret some of the negative things that they've done. Right. I'm sure James maybe wouldn't regret every time he made fun of Snape, because we don't see Sirius really dwelling back on it and being like, oh man, I wish I was nicer to that guy.
I mean, Lupin talks about it.
Lupin
Sirius,
does.
I think, doesn't, because he's still being goaded by Snape and vice versa. They can't get rid of that grudge. And maybe in a way it's him trying to defend James through it. But as we saw with the Horcruxes, regret is a powerful form of magic that obviously is a connection to love. If you feel the regret strong enough, it can break you. And it certainly made life difficult for Snape, especially when dealing with the children of the people he despised. But no, I think regret is a key factor here that needs to be considered.
I think you made a good point with the difference on how Lupin treats Snape and Sirius treats Snape is a very stark difference. Yeah. And by the way, for the record, Snape also treats Lupin with a lot more dignity and respect than he ever gave Sirius. Why? Because, I mean, you treat people well who treat you well. That's human nature, everybody.
The golden rule.
Why would you treat someone well who's treated you badly?
Yeah.
That's not a good thing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that is human nature. So these characters are complicated, and that's what makes us love reading this, and that's what makes us love talking about it and debating it. And again, anything that AV or Drea or anybody else listening to this has, I get it. Yeah. I totally do. And Snape has done some not so great things, and that is true. I just think you have to look at the totality of it. To Drea, to AV, thank you for the comments. We really appreciate that interaction. And obviously, we've had to go into a whole new part 3 just to discuss them, which I can't tell you how awesome that is, that your comments have sparked an entire new addition to the episode and has sparked such thought in us, because we really did have to sit here and think about how
we feel about it.
Yeah, how did we feel about your comments? Do we agree? Do we disagree? Why do we agree or disagree? And the fact that your comments have sparked that thought is awesome. So please, everybody listening, send us those comments. Send us your thoughts. Send us your arguments, even if they disagree with ours. That is totally cool. And you can do that by commenting on Spotify. If you are listening on Spotify, you can also reach out on our socials. We got Twitter, Blue Sky, Instagram, YouTube. You can find us all by searching at Hogwarts a Pod. participate in the polls. As always, we love seeing the results of those as well, and they will play into future episodes, as we'll do some episodes specifically dedicated to analyzing those polls. We will be back next week for Chapter 36. It's kind of a big one. Thanks for listening, everybody. Thank you for listening to Hogwarts, a podcast. If you like what you've heard, please click the subscribe button on your preferred podcasting app and follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Hogwarts a Pod.